Yeah, this is a 2000 Subaru Outback with a 2.5 liter engine in it. What I'm going to do is a cylinder head job on this. It has a real slight coolant leak into one of the cylinders. And I'm not going to show every single detail on this because the video will be many hours long. I'm just going to show the technical stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull a radiator and the fans out. And I'm also going to put a new water pump and timing belt on it. Yeah, so I got the radiator and the fans out, and the belts off the front of the engine. So next I'm going to take the timing belt cover and the harmonic balancer off, and then the intake manifold would have to come off. Yeah, and there was not enough room to get a regular impact in here to take the harmonic balancer bolt out, but this Milwaukee stubby impact did it perfect, and it took it right off. Yeah, and this is the first time I've actually had to use this, and this works great. I don't know if you can see the... It's a 2554-20. And before you take the timing belt off, you should always line all the marks up. I'm not going to take it off right now. I'm going to take the intake and the exhaust off before I take that off. But here's the timing marks on these. That red mark, and then there's a slot cut out on the top here. And right here, there's a, if you can see that little line, and then right up above it, there's a notch. And there's a mark here, and the other mark was painted on here. It was right here on this crack. You can't hardly see that. Yeah, so now I'm going to pull the intake manifold off. I just pulled the air cleaner off, and there's just some bolts down here. It looks like it's pretty easy, and then a bunch of wires and hoses you disconnect, and the throttle cables. Yeah, I got the intake manifold off, and it's pretty easy to take the intake manifold off on these cars. You can unplug all the wiring harnesses back here and leave them attached to the intake. Then you're just going to unhook the fuel lines and some hoses and unbolt it, and it comes out of there. And when you disconnect the fuel lines, another thing you want to do is loosen the gas cap up. Because when the car sits here in the sun the next day, what's going to happen is it'll start a siphon, and you'll have gas all over the ground if you don't do that. Yeah, so what I'm going to do next is there's this bracket right next to the AC compressor. That needs to come off because it bolts to the one head. And I'm going to take the timing belt off, and then I'll get underneath it and undo the exhaust. Yeah, and here's what this one bracket looks like once it's removed. And now you can also get to the bolt that holds the dipstick tube on. Yeah, I went ahead and took the alternator and the AC compressor off there. It just gets it out of my way. There was only 3 more bolts that held it right here. Yeah, it gives you a lot more room like that. Yeah, and this customer just had the oil change, and look what's coming out of where the dipstick tube hooks up at. That's from coolant going into the oil, and look at what it looks like on the inside of the valve cover there. Yeah, both heads are off. Yeah, and these are tight fit. You can't slide the head bolts all the way out, so they are kind of difficult to get those out of there. So next, before I can take these to a machine shop, I have to take the cams out of it. And the spark plugs out. And then I can have them surfaced and pressure tested. Yeah, so next I'm going to go over the block with one of these surface prep tools. And this has the medium Scotch-Brite pad on it. It won't damage aluminum. Yeah, and here's what one of these heads looks like when it's all taken apart. I mean, it's quite a bit of screws you got to take out to take all that stuff off. I always set all this stuff out the way it goes. So I'll put everything, it'll be real easy to put this back on, everything back on the right heads. Yeah, when you set everything out the way it goes, you can clean each thing up fast and bolt it back onto these heads. So that's why it's best to lay everything out the way it goes. Okay, both heads are ready to go to the machine shop. Yeah, I'm going to have them surfaced and pressure tested. You also don't ever want to sit these down on the gasket surface here unless you're sitting it on cardboard, because you don't want to scratch this area up, especially not after you have them surfaced. Yeah, I just got the heads back from the machine shop. They were surfaced and pressure tested. I got the head set and the head bolts. And so now I'm ready to assemble the heads. And with the head bolts, anytime I'm looking up the headset and it says head bolts required, I replace them. If it says recommended, I normally don't replace them then. Yeah, with most of these jobs like this, if you go just a little bit higher on the price, the customer will junk the car. That's why you got to kind of keep the price down as low as possible. Yeah, in the gasket set, it also said to measure the thickness of the old gasket. That they use two different head gaskets. One's 26 thousandths and one's 53 thousandths. This engine uses 26 thousandths head gaskets. So you want to make sure that you got the right head set. Yeah, so now I'm ready to start putting one of the heads together. And I also, when I take these heads off, I mark them right and left so everything goes back together the same. Yeah, then what I do before I put the seal on, I put a little bit of grease on the inside just so it doesn't get damaged. Yeah, and I also put a little bit of grease on the journals here, and I put the cap in the back here. And on this piece, before it goes on, their gasket sealer has to go on here all the way around. You can even see some of it still on here. And the gasket set, that's why it came with this gasket sealer. Yeah, and you want to go right up to the seal and this piece on the other cap on the end. Yeah, and I put all these bolts in by hand so I don't screw something up, because you can break them real easy. I also just bought this impact at Harbor Freight today. Yeah, it seems to work pretty good. That's what I used to put that sprocket back on there. Yeah, and it's best to take and line this mark up straight up before you put the rocker arms on. Then it's turned right where everything's going to line up right when you go to put the timing belt on, which would be right to this groove, and that's the intake manifold side. Yeah, when you go to tighten the rocker arms down, make sure every one of them's out on the end of the valve here, where it doesn't catch the valve and bend the valve when you tighten it down. Yeah, and see, I got this Milwaukee stubby impact on the setting where it stops as soon as it hits, because I'm going to tighten this down by hand, and here's how that works. Which that makes it nice to put this back together with. And with the head bolts, I like to put never seize on the threads and up here on the washer and under the washer. That's so when you tighten it down, it tightens down easy and you get a proper the torque on it. And I do all of them like that. Yeah, because on this engine you actually have to have the head bolts in the head when you put the head up to the block, because there's so little room. Yeah, so now I'm ready to put the heads back on. I've already cleaned the block up on both sides. And I left the oil drain plug out of it for a few days to get as much of that oil out of there. Yeah, and I took the two nuts off the motor mounts and I jacked it up to where now there's a lot more clearance on this side. Because when I took the head out, there's only about 1/8 of an inch of clearance, and I don't want to damage the gasket or put any scratches in this. So now I probably got about 1/2 an inch of room, and then I'll jack it up the other way and get the other side to go up when I go to put the other head in. This makes it so much easier. Yes, I got one of the heads on. Even with the engine jacked up like that, it's still not easy to get this head in here. And I just got all the bolts ran down to where they just touch. I still have to torque it. And I just used this little 1/4 inch drive ratchet for that, and that worked, made it much faster. And this is how you actually torque the heads. With new bolts, you're going to go 22 foot-pounds the first step, 51 foot-pounds the second step. Then you're going to loosen them 180 degrees, and then another 180 degrees, which must be backing them completely off. The two inner bolts then are going to go to 25 foot-pounds. The outer bolts are going to go to 6 to 11 foot-pounds. Then the next step, you're going to go 90 degrees, and then the final step is another 90 degrees. Yeah, so I got the head all torqued down. Now I'm ready to clean this valve cover up and put it on that side. Then I'll start working on the other side of the engine. Yeah, so I got this side of the engine all back together. So now I'm ready to start working on this other side. I'll put the head together. Yeah, and this is the left cylinder head. There's a little bit more stuff you have to put on this head. You got this plastic piece, and the cam position sensor goes through this hole here. Yeah, and this is how that cover and the cam position sensor goes in there. Now on this cam, that mark, it lines up, there's a little groove in this plastic cover that it lines up with. Yeah, so now I got the left head back on, and I got the dipstick tube in and this pipe for the heater hose. So now I'm ready to put the valve cover back on. Yeah, so I got this side back together. So now, next I'm going to lower the engine back down and bolt the motor mounts back up. Yeah, now I'm ready to bolt the exhaust back up. And I've said this before in videos, but people still leave comments on there. They have these metal gaskets like this. You want to reuse the gaskets or buy new ones from the manufacturer. These Felpro gaskets are no good. If you put those in there, it'll blow out in just a short time. And it also warps either the exhaust pipe or the manifold. So it's best just to reuse these. Yeah, now I have all the rest of the parts to finish this job. So the first thing I'm going to do is put the water pump on, and I got the timing belt kit that comes with idlers and everything. Normally when I do these, I just replace the timing belt and the water pump. But this one, some of them, the bearings don't sound bad. So I'm replacing the whole thing. It costs a lot more money to do that, but we don't want to have any problems in the future. Yeah, so here's the water pump. I also got a new thermostat since the thermostat housing's on the water pump. And you got to take it apart anyways. And I also bought a new hose that goes on here. This hooks to that metal pipe that goes to the heater hose. Yeah, you might as well replace that since it's easy to do now. There's also this little piece of rubber that goes on the water pump. I took and glued this on here just so it stays. Yeah, I got the water pump and this small hose on down here. Best way, the water pump fits in here kind of tight, so the best way to do that is to take gasket sealer, put it on the gasket, stick the gasket to the engine block, and then slide the water pump in, and not try to stick the gasket on the water pump first. So now I'm ready to replace all these idlers, and then we'll put the timing belt on. So here's what comes in this kit. All the idlers, the tensioner, and the timing belt. A lot of these kits come with a water pump, but this one doesn't. Yeah, and here's what it looks like with new idlers on here. I don't have the tensioner on it yet. Yeah, and how these tensioners actually work is there's a spring in here and there's oil in it. It says to put a C-clamp in this, on this in the vertical position, pull this pin out, then move this piston in and out to get the air out of the system. Yeah, I got the timing belt back on there. These type of timing belts that actually have these marks in it, if you can see that, they make it real easy to line everything up right. A lot of timing belts don't have these marks on it, but you can see everything still lines up perfect. Right below the crankshaft position sensor, there's a little mark in the block, and then there's a little mark on the sprocket on the crankshaft. Those two line up. And on the left camshaft, which is the driver's side, there's a little notch in the plastic here, and there's a mark on there that lines up. Then on the right side, which is the passenger side, there's right where this piece is, there's no mark actually on this side, but there's a mark on the sprocket, and right where this piece attaches to the head at is straight up and down, and that's where it lines up at. So now what I have to do is release this tensioner, and all you do is just pull this piece out. And these are good to save for when you're working on other cars too to have. Yeah, so now I put the harmonic balancer bolt back in here, and I'm going to turn the engine over by hand with a ratchet 2 times, and I'm going to make sure everything still stays lined up. Yeah, so I just turned it over 2 times by hand, and everything still lines up. The white marks on the belt won't line up again unless you turn it over a whole bunch of times. but these marks line up where they're supposed to. Hey, you always want to make sure nothing hits, and you've done this before you put it all back together. What I do is take the timing belt cover and I scratch the mileage and the date and everything when the timing belt was replaced, so the next person who works on this car doesn't tell the customer he needs a timing belt. They do come with a sticker you can put on there. The sticker will fall off or the ink will get wiped off of it and you won't know when it's been done last. Yeah, I just put the alternator and the air conditioning compressor back on here. So the next step is to put the intake manifold back on. So I'm going to clean this up and put this back on. Yeah, the intake manifold's back on. Yeah, it's not too hard to put the intake on these cars. And when there's places where there's bolts you can't get to reach to hold them in there, you can just take a piece of a plastic bag. Whoops. I don't know if I've showed this before. And you just stick it over the head of the bolt, and that keeps it to where you can where the bolt can't fall out of there, especially when you're going to put the bolts back in the intake. That works good. With the fuel lines here, the one that comes from the fuel filter goes to the upper line, the gold colored one. The other two are kind of lighter in color. Yeah, I almost got it finished. I just got to put the radiator in and a few things. And this piece that hooks to the air cleaner and the fans and that one the overflow, the reservoir there. And I got a brand new radiator that's going in it. Because this one leaks a tiny little bit around here, right on the transmission core fitting. And the radiator only cost $80 from 1-800-RADIATOR. Yeah, so now it's all back together, and I already put the oil and the antifreeze in it. I just left that cover off. I'm going to run it and see. Then I'll put the cover on underneath. Yeah, and anytime I do a job like this, I always run it with the heater on until it starts blowing hot air out. That means there's no air pockets trapped in the engine. Yeah, I've got one small leak coming from that hose that goes to the throttle body. So I'm going to take the air cleaner and take the throttle body off and look at that. Yeah, now it's all finished. Yeah, one last thing I forgot to do. Anytime I do some big job to a car, I always plug a scan tool into it after that to make sure there's no codes. Because it's very simple to forget to plug something back in. And this will tell you if you did that. Yeah, and there's no codes.